Hello everybody, I'm FIDE Master Alex Longson and I'm going to record tonight a couple of videos looking at some games from Cheshire Junior Chess Club on the 22nd of January. So the video's in two parts. In part one I'm going to look at 5 games fairly quickly, and in the second part I've got to look at 2 more games in a bit more detail. There'll be several points in the video where I'll ask you to pause the video and consider the position for yourselves. I'll put some little mini puzzles. So when you pause the video, try and think what you play in a game, and then when you press play, you can see whether you've got the correct answer or not, or certainly the answer that I've suggested. Okay, so we'll jump straight in. The first game of the night is Max versus Rohit. Okay. So we have e4, e5, and the Italian game. Very common, very popular opening. Black played the most common move, bishop c5, and now White played something quite novel. Move knight takes e5. This is a mistake actually. And White's basically trying to play for a fork trick, but unfortunately it just doesn't work in this position. And Black didn't react here optimally at all. Black took on f2. So I guess both players assume that after the move knight takes e5, pawn d4, White would win his piece back. But unfortunately for White, this bishop on c4 is hanging. So basically the fork trick normally doesn't work if you've got a bishop on c4, or if you're Black, there's a bishop on c5, because after the knight takes after knight takes knight, the Black knight is attacking the bishop here. So it simply just doesn't work in these positions. But Black didn't spot this and decided to play bishop takes f2 check. And after the move king takes, knight takes e5, we've reached a position where the material's balanced. White's king's a little bit uncomfortably placed on f2, and the bishop is currently attacked on c4. So White really has got to do something about this bishop. That's the main concern here. But instead, I think Max was overly focused on the safety of the king and moved the king back to e1. Yeah, White should play the move bishop e2 here. And although Black's got this queen check, forking the king and the pawn on e4, after the moves g3, queen takes e4, pawn d4, Black's a pawn up, but White's not doing too badly. We'll see after the knight's obviously attacked, after the knight retreats, White can continue to develop to attack the queen. And okay, White's king looks a bit funny on f2, but Black's king also on e8 isn't looking too comfortable after the White rook switches to e1 on the open file. So White's certainly got some play for the pawn here. It's certainly better than the move played in the game king e1, which just allowed Black to take a whole piece. And the stronger you get at chess, the higher up you go, the more important material becomes, and between two good players, a whole piece up really should decide the game, unless Black makes some mistakes. So we'll play through the remaining moves. So both sides start to get some pieces out, and White pins the knight on f6. So actually, if White wasn't a piece down, he'd have a pretty good position here, but Black can get away with quite a lot being a piece up. So White manages to damage Black's pawn structure. So these pawns, f6 and f7, are doubled. They're also isolated, which means they cannot be protected by another Black pawn, and therefore they're quite weak and quite difficult to defend. And again, in a normal game, this would be a bit of a problem for Black, but again, because he's a piece up, that's the most critical factor here. So White played the move rook f1, attacking f6, and Black decided to retreat the knight to protect the pawn on f6, very sensible. White continued to gang up on f6, and Black played the move queen e7. So Black's decided he doesn't really want to castle kingside because of these broken pawns, so he's moving the queen out of the way so that he can castle queenside. And now actually in the game, White castled queenside, which if you've been paying attention is actually an illegal move, because the White king's already moved. And of course in chess, if your king's already moved, then you can't castle. But the players didn't actually spot this until a couple of moves later. And once the move's been played, the clock's been pressed, and your opponent hasn't noticed it, then even if some illegal moves have been played, then you have to play on. So now, unfortunately, the software I'm using doesn't allow me to castle here as white, so I'm going to make a couple of moves up just to get to the position that actually happened in the game. So King D2 didn't actually happen, but we effectively got to this position after both sides castled queenside, and the game continued from here. So white played the move Queen E3, attacking the pawn on A7. One thing to bear in mind when you castle queenside is that your rook's pawn isn't protected anymore. Whereas if you castle kingside, your king would be protecting the rook's pawn. So the rook's pawn's often a little bit vulnerable here. So white immediately attacks the pawn, and black defends with king b8. White play bishop f2 to set up a double attack on a7. So, for example, if black were to play a move like pawn h5, white would win immediately with. Well, actually, sorry, it doesn't win immediately because of this knight b8. But yeah, there's no need to allow white to take on a7 in this position, and black played b6 to block it. And then white defended his own a2 pawn with king b1. It isn't clear that black was actually threatening to take that. I mean, let's say, for example, white would have played a move like bishop h4 and black takes the pawn. Often it can be quite risky to capture this because your bishop can end up being trapped, and now white's threatening to play king b2 and round up the bishop. So it wasn't clear that black was threatening to take there, but white defended against it anyway. Black hopped forward with knight e5, and white returns h4 with the bishop, again attacking f6. Also, you'll note if white were to take on f6 with the bishop, it would set up a nasty kind of double fork and skewer here, winning lots of material. So the black actually decided to drop the knight back again. So black's wasting some time, but again, it's the whole piece up, so black can take liberties in this position and still be completely winning. White played rook f2, a very common idea. The rook is currently sat on a half open file. We say it's half open because the white pawn missing, which means the rook's got quite a lot of scope here. But a file's only fully open when there's no pawns on it at all. So because there's some black pawns on it, we say it's half open. But rooks belong on open files and half open files. So the rook's well placed here. And in fact, by playing the move rook f2, this is a very typical idea. White wants to bring the other rook to f1, doubling up the power of the rooks along this f line. So this is an idea you've not seen before that's well worth remembering. So yeah, so white's now attacking f6 with 3 pieces, 1, 2, 3, and black's defending it with 2. So white's effectively threatening to win a pawn back on f6, and black can't defend this pawn anymore. So he puts his own rook on another half open file. And if white were to now capture on f6, we might get the following moves. Black could take on g2. So white decided to proactively defend the pawn with g3. So white's playing this phase of the game very well, in fact. It's just a shame that the opening went so wrong. Black decided to get the queen out of the way, and now white decided to cash in on take on f6, which makes sense, but actually by exchanging a few pieces, black's probably quite happy, because when you're material up in chess, it's just a very good idea to exchange some pieces, because you're getting rid of some potential counterplay for your opponent, and if you can reach an end game, you can imagine, say, the queens and rooks all get swapped off, and we have an end game with black having a bishop and 6 pawns against just 7 pawns. Black should easily win that game. The bishop will just be able to pick off the pawns. So black's quite happy to exchange some pieces off here and continue his policy with rook g6. Takes. White put the rook in on f6. So I mean, I'm not saying these moves are the best, but they all seem fairly sensible. And eventually we reached a position here where black offered an exchange of queens, a sensible idea. White exchanged, and we reached this position, and the players here stopped notating. And actually, that happened quite a bit in the games I'm looking at tonight. The games are fairly rapid, 15 minutes each, because we started a bit late. So players were asked to notate the games until they had 5 minutes left, and then stop. So so a lot of the games will be cut short before we see the end. So the player stopped notating here, and Black went on to win the game with his extra piece, really. So Black played a good game, didn't really do really much wrong. Once White got out the opening, played quite well, but again, when you lose a piece out the opening against a good player, you're really asking a lot of yourself to get back in the game there. So the game really decided, or should have been decided immediately if Black had taken the knight on e5. But then once White played the move back, king back to e1, then Black's just the whole piece up, and the game's lost, really. Okay, so we'll move on to the next game, and this was a game between Asta and Dylan. Dylan's new to the club. This is his second week, and Asta's been coming now for a couple of terms. And we see a similar situation, actually. So in this position, again here, Black can immediately take on e4. It's slightly different to the fork trick we looked at last week, slightly different position, but Black can still play knight takes e4, and d5 still works. In fact, White can play move queen h5 here, which leads to some other complications, but that's a story for another day. Black played knight c6 and knight f3, and again, now knight takes e4 would be the standard fork trick that we looked at quite a bit last week. Black again declined to play that, and now White decided to play knight takes e5, going for their own fork trick. But again, as in the last game, this just doesn't work here. Black correctly took the knight, and after pawn d4, again, hopefully we can see that the bishop on c4 is simply hanging. And if Black were to take on c4 now, White to take the bishop on c5. If we count up the pieces, White has bishop and a knight, but Black has bishop, knight, and another knight. So Black has an extra piece effectively through a pawn. So it's almost winning already. But again, Black didn't spot the loose piece here. So we'll see in most of the games we're looking at, the games are being decided not by dashing attacks or complicated tactics, but just by players effectively leaving their pieces hanging or giving away material for nothing. So in chess, really, the first thing that you should really work on is being able to play a full game without blundering pieces and pawns. Because again, good players will just take those pieces, they'll swap everything off, and they'll win in the end game. So it's just really important that you take extra care to spot when you can capture your opponent's pieces, but also not to put your own pieces where they can be captured. So we reach this position. Black's knight is attacked, and here Black should probably just take on c4, and after knight takes c4, queen takes c4, d6. The position's roughly equal, materials level, development's about level, and it's a game. But Black decided to retreat the knight back to c6, and I don't really like this because I don't really like wasting too much time with the pieces here. And after queen d1, I think White's a little bit better now. Although after a move like d6 or rook e8, the game's still very much in the balance. But Black decided to return to e5 with the knight. I think this is just wasting a bit too much time really with this piece. Obviously the bishop's attacked, but after the bishop drops back to b3, White's going to play the move pawn f4, hitting the knight on e5. And f4 is a move that White would quite like to play anyway, to start attacking on the king side. So really this knight is just giving kind of White an extra tempo to develop an initiative. So the game continued d6, f4, and Black, instead of retreating the knight, played the move bishop g4. So we call this an intermediate move. Sometimes you don't have to react to a threat, you can play an intermediate move, making a threat of your own. So obviously we're White to capture the knight here, Black would quite happily take White's queen, say thank you very much. So White moved the queen out of the way to e1, which is a good square, because the White queen can now come out to g3 or h4, attacking on the king side. Black retreat the knight, and now White played quite a nice move here. So if you pause the video and just take a few moments just to think what you might play here as white. Okay, the move played in the game was the move pawn f5, which is a good move. White attacks the knight on g6, but importantly we see it cuts off the bishop's retreat. So the bishop can no longer retreat to e6 or d7, so the bishop's actually in a bit of trouble here. Knight e5, but now unfortunately white didn't follow up on the idea, so white could win a piece here by playing the move pawn h3, and after bishop h5, g4, we see that this bishop's trapped. Now it's true that black could get a couple of pawns for the piece, but actually white's a lot better here. Obviously the piece is worth more than 2 pawns, but even though white's king has been shorn of its defenders, its pawns, the white king is very safe. The reason is that it's very hard for black to attack the king with these heavy pieces. If you can't bring your queens and rooks into the attack, then your attack isn't really going anywhere. And actually the lack of pawns means that there are open files against the black king, so it's much more likely that the black king is going to fall under attack here. So the arrows kind of point out here where white can start to put her pieces. Bishop f4, queen g3, king steps out of the way for rook g1, and suddenly basically all of the pieces are pointing at the black king. Bishop's pointing at the black king, knight's going to hop into d5, and yeah, just everything's heading that way. So white's material up with a big attack as well. So basically winning this position. So h3 would have been very strong, just trapping the bishop. I mean, this possibility existed for quite a few moves actually, but white didn't go for it. So bishop f4, queen e7. Again, h3 here would win a piece. Queen g3. I mean, this is this is a sensible idea as well, but it's just not as strong as winning the piece outright. Now actually we see that the queen is actually stood in the way of the g pawn. White here blundered at the exchange, played the move rook ad1, and now black should in fact capture this loose rook. So again, just be very careful about where you put pieces. Make sure it's safe. A rook's worth 5, the bishop's only worth 3, so this would win a couple of points for black, and also get rid of this problem piece. Possibly worth considering was bishop h6, threatening mate in 1, which is always nice. The move g6 here would defend, but it's very weakening. We see that this knight now is very vulnerable to this pin. So white's kind of moved the bishop backwards and forwards, but by enticing this g7 pawn forward, the knight is now very weak. And if, for example, if black were to make a waiting move, white could play the discovered attack, f takes g6, and this rook joins in the attack, and white's completely winning. So after bishop h6, I guess black would probably defend with queen f8, and yeah, it looks like it's a nice position for white here, to be honest with you. But yeah, rook ad1 is quite a bad blunder, but black didn't see it and played the move rook ad8, so didn't take advantage here. And now the game continued, knight d5, attacking the queen, so black should take. Rook takes d5, so moving the rook out of the attack of the bishop, and c6. So the players got down to less than 5 minutes here, so this is where the notation ended. I didn't actually see who won the game, but I think in this position white's still doing quite well. I think this bishop's still quite vulnerable to being attacked, and all of white's pieces look quite nicely placed. But you know, it's still an interesting game. But yeah, so at this point the players start notating, so I'll have to leave that one there. We'll move on to the next game between Ethan and Rahul. So yeah, interesting opening in this one. Again, we've got the Italian game, and here Ethan played a very rare move, pawn d4. I had to look this one up because in this particular position I wasn't really aware of all the subtleties. And obviously black can capture this in 3 different ways. Rahul chose knight takes d4, which is a perfectly good move. Black could capture with the pawn, where white has a few options here, but the the most typical move is to play the move pawn c3, which isn't really a gambit. If black was to take, then white could potentially immediately take on f7, queen d5 check, kind of winning the piece back, and also the black king's exposed. After the move c3, players tend to play the move knight f6. We've transposed here into an Italian main line. I don't want to labour the point too much, but this position is more typically reached after the moves pawn c3, knight f6, d4, pawn takes, and you'll see we've transposed to the line I was just looking at there. And this is a very interesting position. White's the position is roughly equal. White can play move pawn e5 or can take on d4. So there's lots of theory here, as well as pawn takes d4. Black could capture on d4 with the bishop. This is also interesting, and I believe here white should continue knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop e3, attacking the knight on d4, threatening to win the pawn back. And if knight c6, the game might continue queen h5, threatening a version of scholar's mate. Queen e7, white plays knight c3, intending knight d5, and after knight f6, queen h4, I think white's got quite reasonable compensation here. So black is a pawn up, but all of white's pieces are developed. White has the pair of bishops, which in chess is often an advantage, and somehow white just seems quite active, and I think black should be better, but in a practical game this activity is quite difficult to handle, and this is quite a reasonable gambit position I think for white. So d4 is quite interesting. It is quite rare actually, but it doesn't seem to be a bad move. Rahul played knight takes d4, which is okay, but it needs to be followed up quite accurately. Ethan took on e5 now, and Rahul actually played a losing move here, move knight e6, which does lose. In fact, the only move here for black which kind of keeps him in the game really is move queen e7. It isn't immediately clear why this move is good, but actually it kind of works out for black. So obviously black's attacking the knight on e5, and white can take on f7 here in two ways. If we examine knight takes f7 first, black can play queen takes e4 check, attacking the king, and also a double attack on c2. The best move here for white is king f1, because if he was to block with bishop e3 say, then black takes on c2 with check. So white should play king f1, and black can play the move queen takes c2, and we get quite a sharp position here. So white's captured a rook and is also threatening bishop takes g8, but in fact black should just calmly play the move knight f6 here. And even though black's to hold rook down at this point, or rook for a pawn, black's actually better because we see this rook on a1 is completely trapped. So black's going to capture that next and be a pawn up. And in fact, the fact that the king's on f1 as well means that it's not so easy for white to bring this rook into the game, and it basically just kind of works out for black. It's still a very sharp position. This is quite good for black. If we go back to queen e7, white also has the option of bishop takes f7 check, but after king f8 we see that the knight on e5 is still attacked. So if the knight were to retreat, say, to f3, black could capture here, check, and then grab the bishop on f7, winning a piece. So white should take on g8, after king takes, retreat the knight, then black gets his pawn back with queen takes e4 check, and black's very active here. Following moves might happen something like this, and black's got all the minor pieces out, and would be doing very well, except that this king on g8 isn't very well placed, obviously with the kind of trapping the rook in the corner. So the position is still quite complicated. Black's certainly not worse. So if black had played the move queen e7, would have been well in the game. But knight e6 loses immediately. So if you pause the video, take a couple of moments to to think what would you play here as white, and why? Okay, well, Ethan found the correct move, bishop takes e6, which does win. White captures the piece, and black has to capture back. He's got two choices. Rahul played pawn on f7 takes e6. The problem with d takes e6 is that white can exchange queens, and then after knight takes f7 check, simply fought the king and rook, winning material. But after pawn on f takes e6, we've always got to be very wary of moving our f pawn before our king's castle, because this queen check is often devastating, and so it proves here. Obviously, king f8, queen h7 is checkmate on the spot. King e7. Well, it's possible that queen check, black's king might be getting hunted down here, but if at the very least white has the move knight g6 check, forking king and rook. If h takes g6, queen takes rook, wins material. So black has to play the move pawn g6, and now a very common tactic. White simply takes the pawn on g6, because the pawn on h7 of course is pinned due to the rook on h8. Probably the best move for black here was knight f6, attacking the queen. And then after the moves, queen takes c5, h takes g6, knight c3, white's simply a pawn up. White's got 7 pawns to black's 6, and black's king's side still a wreck really. This pawn g6 is very weak, and the king's going to struggle to find safety. So yes, this is technically a winning position for white, but this would have been a much better try. Because after h takes g6, queen takes rook, white's won an exchange. So we say when we win a rook for a minor piece, such as a knight or bishop, we call it the exchange. So white's an exchange and a pawn up, but also has an ongoing attack. And after the move king f7, Ethan found a very clean win here. The move bishop h6, threatening queen g7 check, which would force checkmate after king. Would force huge material wins after king e8, queen takes g8. It's just impossible for black to defend here. For example, queen f6, queen h7 check, and queen takes knight. So bishop h6 just wins on the spot. Play through the remaining moves quickly. I won't really comment on them. Black's basically lost a queen and now another knight, and yeah, everything just goes. Everything's just dropping really here. So black played on till the bitter end. I'd have been tempted to give up quite a few moves before this, and the game lasted a couple more moves. I haven't got the final checkmating moves, but clearly white's completely winning this. So yeah, well, we'll see in these sharp openings, just one move can completely change the evaluation. If black finds queen e7, it's got a nice game. But if he doesn't defend accurately, suddenly white's completely winning. So yeah, chess can be as brutal as that. Okay, so we'll move on to our next game. This is a game between Killian and Maida. Okay, so yeah, we saw a move pawn d4, which was a nice change from 1e4. D4 is in fact the second most popular starting move for white. E4, of course, the most popular. But d4 is a great move. It's been played by almost all of the greatest champions in the history of the game. The game tends to be a bit more positional, a bit slower than after pawn e4, but at least they're very different positions, and so you can't really use your specific opening knowledge from 1e4 to kind of play the same moves, because it's not really, the position's just different. I mean, one big difference right away is that the queen is protecting the central pawn, whereas after the move pawn e4 we see this pawn's not protected. So this leads right away to some different types of ideas. Pawn d5, and now white played the move knight c3, and right away we have one of our kind of differences here. And there's nothing terribly wrong with the move knight c3, but it isn't considered to be white's best, and it's generally frowned on in these queen pawn games to block your c pawn, because in the d4 openings, white's main try for an advantage is to play the move pawn c4, challenging black's centre. And what white wants is after the move d takes c4 to play e4, grabbing the centre, and in fact white's going to win this pawn back on c4 in a couple of moves anyway. So this is called the Queen's Gambit, one of the most famous openings in chess. So by playing knight c3, white's effectively blocking the c pawn, meaning the Queen's Gambit's impossible. It's not a bad move developing the knight like this, but it's not considered to be the most critical. And black followed suit here with knight c6. Again, move knight f6 I think is better, leaving open the option to play the move c5. So in the d4 openings, try and remember to not block your c pawn where possible. It really does make a bit of a difference. So white played the move knight f3, so he had the following moves. And here black blundered horribly with knight takes d4. I feel a little bit guilty actually for mentioning the fork trick so often last week, because I think some players have gone a bit crazy tonight, trying to get the fork trick in all kinds of positions where it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work here for a couple of reasons. I mean, were white to play knight takes d4, e5 simply doesn't work because after bishop takes e5, in the e4 openings, the piece here would be a queen and it would be protecting this square. But of course, because we started with d4 instead of e4, we have a slightly different situation. And also here, white can simply take with the queen, which is what happens. So it's great that you've remembered the idea, but in chess it's important to be accurate. A trick that might work in one position doesn't always work in similar positions. So here black's basically given up a piece for a pawn, and white should be winning the game already if he's now careful. Knight g4. I mean, I see what black's trying to do here, trying to force through the move e5 anyway, but moving a piece for the second time in the opening isn't normally a good idea. And here white should simply play the move queen takes d5, which would win some more material. And white's just completely winning here, a piece up with better development. White played the move pawn e3 instead. Black played f6, so very consistent. Black clearly wants to get this fork in after all. But again, white could simply take on d5. But played a really poor move here actually, quite instructive. Move bishop b5 check. And this is a typical mistake. It's easy to see what white's thinking. I'm going to develop a piece. I'm going to develop it with tempo, with a check, attacking the king, which gains me some time. But unfortunately, black can simply block the check with c6, which is a useful move for black anyway, defending the pawn on d5, and also gaining time by obviously attacking the bishop on b5. So yes, it's normally not a good idea to throw in this check if your opponent can just block with the pawn. But it's normally a useful move for your opponent anyway, and it just loses you time now as you retreat your bishop. So unfortunately, white after bishop retreats, black does finally get the move e5 in, getting the fork in after all. So a very delayed fork trick, but it got there eventually. But white's still better. After knight takes, bishop takes e5. White's a pawn up here with good development, so should be still doing very well. Black played bishop b4. Not a good idea actually, and white here should take on g7 with the bishop. I think this would probably win the game. For example, if rook g8, bishop takes h7, just looks very strong. But black's idea was seen after queen takes b4. Black wants to take on e5. White castled, and here we had our second instance of illegal castling in the night. Black castled here, castle kingside, which is of course illegal because the queen here covers f8, and you not allowed to castle through check in chess. So you're not allowed to castle if you're in check, you're not allowed to castle into check, and you're not allowed to castle through check. So we'd see black's king would have to pass through the f8 square, which is illegal. So again, because the software doesn't permit me to actually castle here, I'll make a couple of kind of roundabout moves just so we get to the position that was in the game. So we reached this position after black castled, and now we're back on track. So I attacked the knight on e5, and black exchanged, and black played the move queen e8. So black's a pawn down here, but isn't doing too badly. This bishop and queen and rook are all, you see, they're all quite active. I wouldn't say black's got compensation here, but it's still a game. White should probably just defend the free square here, also bringing in the final piece. It's just a good idea in chess in general to make sure all your pieces are playing. So here white's got the rook out, the knight out, the queen out. So what's the worst placed piece? Well, it's this rook on a1. So it makes sense to bring this into the game. White went queen d6, infiltrating the black position, but leaving this pawn hanging. So black should probably take the pawn here with check, but didn't play that. They'd moved rook f6 instead, and after queen c7 again, black could take on e3, but decided to attack here on the king side, which makes some sense as well. So attacking d3, and also maybe intending bishop h3 next. In fact, this was the move played. So a very common idea once the queen's on the same file as the king to bring another piece to attack the g2 pawn. So white correctly figured out that black was threatening queen takes g2 mate. So white would play a pawn move like rook e1, and queen takes g2 would end the game immediately. So white has to defend this pawn, and he chose the move g3. Which isn't the best move. Would be better here to play the move rook f2, obviously defending the pawn from the side. The problem with the move pawn g3 is that black should probably now just capture the rook on f1, winning some material. The rook is obviously worth two points more than a bishop. But black didn't capture the rook. Could move rook e6, and actually both players now kind of left this rook on f1 hanging for a few moves, so I'm not sure if they didn't spot it or they just weren't too bothered. But yeah, this rook on f1 is hanging for quite a while here. So we eventually reached this position, and here the notation stopped. Black later won this game. I didn't see the finish, but if we look at this particular position, black's still a pawn down, but the white king side's a little bit vulnerable, and I would say black's got some compensation here. For a start, the e3 pawn is attacked twice. Black could also start to attack the white king side with the moves h5, h4. This is quite a typical plan. I mean, let's make some moves for white. If queen takes a7, h5, a4, h4, say, we see that black's threatening to take on g3, and if the move, if white captures, black can use a rook lift. So we call this rook lift when we move our rook forward so it can swing to the side and attack the king this way. So this would be a very typical way for black to try and attack the white king here. So I think black actually did end up crashing through on the king side, but we haven't got the moves here. So we'll move on to our fifth and final game of part one. Game between Oliver and Jessica. I only have 10 moves in this game, but by move 10, white was completely lost. So that's fine. We'll get to the critical moment soon enough. Okay, bishop b5 makes a change from the Italian opening. This move, bishop b5, is known as the Spanish opening, or the Ruy Lopez, named after a Spanish priest from the 1500s who we believe was the first player to on record to have played this move. That's one of the things I love about chess, actually, that players from hundreds of years ago wrote down their moves, so we can see what players played a long time ago, which is a privilege that we don't have in other games and sports. We don't know how people played football, for example, 200-300 years ago, as we don't have any records. But in chess, we have records going back hundreds of years, which I just find quite amusing. For many years this was considered more testing than the Italian. It was more popular at grandmaster level. Although in recent years the Italians become very popular again, even at the very highest levels. But yeah, the Spanish is a very high class opening. One of the reasons is that White immediately puts the question to Black: am I threatening to take your knight on e5, followed by taking the pawn on e5? Well, we'll see. Black played pawn a6, which was Paul Morphy's favourite move, and still considered the main line today. And here the main line for White is to drop the bishop back to a4. White instead chose to take on c6, which is known as the exchange Spanish, and then took on e5. Now this is actually a little bit of a mistake. Turns out that White wasn't threatening to win a pawn at all. And here, Black has two moves which win the pawn back. Queen g5, which attacks the knight and the pawn. An even stronger move, Queen d4, again attacking the knight and the pawn. And this leads to a slightly better position for White. After knight f3, Queen takes e4 check. White doesn't really want to play king f1, forfeiting the right to castle. But after Queen e2, takes, and say bishop g4, Black's got a very comfortable position. He's won the pawn back. We pin the knight on f3, and let's play a few more moves. Let's say knight c3, castles, d3, knight f6. We'll see it. Some moment Black's going to swing a rook to e8 with check, and basically just all Black's pieces are becoming active quite quickly. And this king in the centre, even though the queens have been exchanged, this king in the centre still might cause White a few problems getting coordinated. So the correct response to knight takes e5 is queen d4 with a nice game for Black. But Black, in fact, didn't take up this option and played the move bishop d6, which develops a piece. But here White simply dropped the knight back. White's captured a pawn, snaffled a pawn on e5 and got away with it, and should be just a lot better here. So this would have consolidated White's extra pawn. d4 is not a bad move, protecting the knight. And here Black played a nice move, actually, c5, trying to undermine White's centre. If White were to capture on c5, then of course the knight's hanging. So Black's fighting hard here to try and get some counterplay. White defends the knight on e5, good move. Pawn takes d4, queen takes d4. Black played pawn f6, attacking the knight on e5 and basically saying that your knight's pinned because of your bishop on f4, which is almost correct. But White only has one good move here, but the move is good enough. Yeah, another test for you here. If you pause the video and try and work out how White can protect his material advantage here. Okay, well, White has the clever move knight d3, which steps out of the attack, but also protects the bishop on f4. And after bishop takes f4, White has the intermediate move queen takes d8 check, and then taking the bishop back. And we'll see that White has effectively consolidated his pawn advantage, transposed to the endgame, and has excellent chances to convert the material advantage here. So knight d3 was the only way to save the piece. White didn't see this, played knight c4, and Black grabbed the bishop on f4 and has now won a piece and is is winning the game now. Although, you know, if White played more or less any sensible move here, the game continues. But I guess White had a bit of a blind spot here. Just didn't see that we see that the bishop's effectively discovered an attack on the White queen. After the move pawn e5, Black could just capture the queen here for free. Although in fact, I think Black didn't take the queen right away. I think both players missed this for a couple of moves, and then later Black did capture the queen and went on to win the game. But the score sheets don't make much sense here. I couldn't decipher it. So, but yeah, Black won a game in the end, and I think that's Jessica's best victory to date. So congratulations to Jessica. And that brings a conclusion to part 1 of the video. So I hope to see you for part 2.